everyone, Skippy here, and welcome to One Piece episode 955, directed by Tasuku Shimaya and supervised by Kenji Yokoyama. While the preview doesn't show too much from the get-go, so I'm not immediately excited for it, what we've seen of Tasuku Shimaya's board for this episode looks quite Komaki-inspired due to her mentorship, and is on par with his previous work from 936. So that should mean that despite all odds, it'll hopefully end up being quite good, especially when Kenji Yokoyama's nostalgic yet accurate to the current manga corrections are always a well-polished treat. When it's an episode with such a monumental moment for the arc that not only adapts the entirety of a pretty beefy chapter, but also adds in continuity filler where it's most needed, it would be a shame if it turned out to be of a lesser quality when compared to the past few weeks. So I'm hoping that Shimaya can really continue to pull out the big guns and give us more of what we've already seen in more ways than one. So will episode 955's end product do justice to this course-changing moment for the arc? Time to make an alliance and find out. This episode covers the entirety of chapter 954, and if there were ever an episode that sticks religiously close to the manga, it'd be this one. As a chapter that already has an amazing amount of content going on in it as Oda transitions between the slowly dwindling days before the raid on Onigaishima, it makes it so it's an episode that wouldn't really benefit whatsoever from being split up into a couple different ones, nor would it really be prone to being extended all that much with the filler outside of slightly showing the fight between the former Kid, Apu, and Hawkins alliance in Kaido. So what we're left with most of the time is really just manga content being put on screen almost verbatim. And while that isn't bad whatsoever, as it's adapted about as well as your average but not quite top of the food chain Talking Heads episode should be, but it's just that. It doesn't really enhance the experience that you would gather from the manga version outside of some bits in the board that are coming up here, and it even uses a fair amount of brief flashbacks to keep the already solid pace moving on briskly, which end up not being offensive in the long run. But when a big moment or comedic scene rears its head, it's still done well, and not leaving me wanting more, which is definitely what an adaptation like this should feel like. Quite like the adaptation here, Shimaya's board is a bit on the average side more often than not, which makes it so the visuals aren't increasingly gorgeous, but there's a couple neat ideas here and there that did catch my eye. Whether it be the shots that remind me of where his mentorship comes from, or the seamless transitions that use objects on the board to its advantage, with stuff like the bead of sweat of one of the jailer's faces leading into Hawkins' dripping blood, or the alcohol pouring into Kaido's mouth turning into the luscious ways of the entrance to Wano as Apu arrives. It may not be as good as 936's board like I expected, and that's mainly down to the level of adaptation at hand and the fact that the episode seems to purposely have a low sheet count, so future episodes can be more animated, which leads to a few repeated shots here and there. But like what we discussed before, it shows off a bit where it counts in the most important sections of the episode, so there's no real reason to complain. And when Kenji Yokoyama gives it an expressive look through his corrections that end up looking very cute with the different faces that the characters make, 955 is just a pretty average episode with sprinkles of some really cool stuff within it. It's definitely not an episode that I loved, nor one that I disliked with a burning passion. Rather one that I just kind of felt okay on in spite of the cool moments that I really did enjoy, but it's just that I don't really think I'll be talking about this one for years to come, which isn't really a bad thing when it still did the exposition and setup based content fairly well. However, we're likely going to get a look at what happens when your Talking Heads episode isn't on the average side of things with next week's episode 956. Series director Tatsuya Nagamine's board looks massively atmospheric and full of character like his boards usually are, which gives episode director in training Nanami Michibata a lot to play with lighting wise. And character designer Midori Matsuda's corrections on characters other than Zoro in what is presumably the first half look so refreshing and on model. I'm a tad bit worried about Toshio Deguchi's half since it looks like it'll be quite different art wise and potentially a downgrade from Matsuda's, but since the preview doesn't really show much of it, all I can really do is sit here and wait for the long-awaited closing scenes of Act 2 with bated breath. Anyways guys, that's it for now. I'm Skippy, and Kawamatsu is seriously just the best.